This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Jean Canavan, and I'm a Deputy Chief Assistant District Attorney in DeKalb County, and I run the White Collar Crime Elder Exploitation Unit. And last night, we all heard from Robert James, who is my boss, the District Attorney of DeKalb County, and then I spoke about some of the elder exploitation scams that we're seeing and that we are prosecuting now in DeKalb County and all over the metro Atlanta area. Also in DeKalb County, we have something that is really unusual here in the state of Georgia, and that is a multidisciplinary departmental task force. And what that really means is the DA's office invites people from all different agencies, including law enforcement, fire department, adult protective services, Social Security, and we all get together and we try to address individual complaints about elder persons in our community. I mention this because our three speakers today are all members of that departmental task force and valued members at that. Our first speaker today is David Blake. David Blake was a law enforcement officer for many years. Among other things, he was in the narcotics undercover position, and then he was in the white collar crime fraud investigative division with the DeKalb County Police Department. He then moved to the district attorney's office and worked with me in the white collar crime unit for many years. And the white collar crime unit started to evolve into elder exploitation as we saw more and more elder victims out there in these white collar crime scams. And David was part of that evolution. Eventually, he's moved into the Division of Aging, and now he is going around the state educating law enforcement and other first responders about what's out there with elder exploitation, how we can fight it, how to investigate it, and that's what he's going to talk to you about today. So, without further ado, David Blake.
Thank you, thank you. Good morning. Welcome, thank you for being here. And we're going to talk about this morning investigating financial crimes against the elderly. And like Jean said, my background is law enforcement. I spent 30 years in DeKalb County, worked at the police department, worked a variety of different positions, undercover narcotics for 6 years, general theft, I worked DUI task force, and then my last 8 years at the DeKalb County Police Department, I worked in the white collar crime unit. It's called the Fraud Financial Crimes Unit at DeKalb County. One of the mandated crimes we would work was exploitation of the elderly. Then I moved over to the DA's office, and I retired in 2010 as the Deputy Chief Investigator over the White Collar Crime Unit. And so basically, for my 30-year career, 16 of those years I've worked exploitation cases involving the elderly. And I've learned through trial and error a lot of the issues that come up and a lot of the problems that officers can have when you're investigating these type of cases. And we're going to talk about that. I worked for the Department of Human Services, Division of Aging Services. In the Division of Aging Services in 2004, the Adult Protective Services moved over and became part of it. And so the role of Division of Aging increased to protection. It used to be that the Adult Protective Services worked under DFACS, the Division of Family and Children's Services. And if you needed help in a case involving an elderly person, you would call DFACS. Well, now it's under the Division of Aging, which it should be. And I'm going to talk about what they do, Adult Protective Services. I work in the Forensic Special Investigative Unit, and what my unit, the mission is to build bridges with law enforcement, to provide training. We also provide a certification program, which I'll talk about later on. We provide technical assistance to officers in case consultation when they're working these cases, because they can be complex, they can be difficult, and a lot of issues can arise. Adult Protective Services, which is part of the Division of Aging Services, their mission is to investigate reports of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. The clients are disabled adults 18 years and older, or elder persons 65 years or older. They also investigate self-neglect and self-abuse. They do an investigation, they do an assessment, and what their whole mission, they don't do criminal investigations. They do an investigation to put protective services in place. What does this person need? If there's a crime involved that they can tell, they're required by law to notify law enforcement to get involved. And what we stress is to work these cases together, to work in conjunction with law enforcement, to pool the resources, the strengths and weaknesses of both agencies, to have a better and a more effective approach to working the case. And I'll give you an example of that. You may have an elder person who suffers from a cognitive impairment, dementia, and they're wiring their money overseas to a telemarketing company, to say Jamaica. And you're trying to get, the family members are trying to get them to stop. It's a crime, it's telemarketing, it's a fraud. But really what can law enforcement do with an overseas company? You're kind of limited what you can really do, but you want to stop that. And how do you stop that person from sending their money? Well, you want to get adult protective services involved, and it may be a situation where they want to put a conservatorship or a guardianship in place. And later on this morning, we're going to have the probate court judges going to talk, and I'm sure he'll talk in more detail about what conservatorship and guardianship. But in conservatorship is basically where the probate court appoints someone to manage your finances for you. And so that may be an option. Well, that's not something traditionally that a law enforcement officer would do, but it is something that adult protective services do. So why are the elderly targeted as prey? Why do the bad guys, the criminals, go after the elderly? For money, greed. And that's not to say that all elderly folks or elderly people are rich or well-to-do, but if you've socked away money in a 401k or a retirement or a pension, by the time you get 65, 75, 85 and higher, you've probably got a nice little nest egg saved up. And that makes for a very tempting target for suspects to go after. You add on top of that, if you've got a cognitive impairment, you have dementia, these other issues that can come up, and you become, that elderly person becomes extremely vulnerable to exploitation. Also, it may simply be the Social Security check that they're going after. Some other reasons, they may be looking for a good deal. They may be on a fixed income and they're counting their pennies. What do I do? And that leaves them open to these door-to-door salespeople who are running scams because they're desperate sometimes. And they're easy to find. For those who were here yesterday, Gene was talking about a case we had with a Gypsy Con Artist. And he went to the Colonnade restaurant. And that is a restaurant that really caters to senior citizens. It's always packed at 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon with senior citizens. You fish where the fish are. If you're a bad guy, that's where you're going to go to look for your victims. And that's what he did. He found our victim sitting by himself. And a lot of the seniors sometimes are lonely. They crave company. And he engaged them in conversation. And as she said yesterday, over the course of just several weeks, he was in a quick claim deed for his house, was taking large amounts of money out of his account, and basically was exploiting him. And what was interesting about that case is our victim was willingly going along with all this. And so if we looked at this like a traditional case, well, it's his money, he can do what he wants with it, right? But when we look at the totality of the circumstances, we look at everything that's involved with that case, well, we know here's a professional con artist taking advantage of it, using undue influence. He's making the decisions, not the victim. The victim's not making those decisions. And so we were able to do the right thing, arrest him, put a really bad person away for a long time. Elderly people can be too trusting. Strangers. Again, this leaves them wide open to these door-to-door salespeople. And then you add in the factor, the mental capacity issues, Alzheimer's, and it really, really makes it where they're extremely vulnerable. They may be physically unable to do their own repairs around their home. So again, you have these door-to-door salespeople coming up, hey, I'll repair your roof, I'll fix your driveway for you, and they may not have anyone else who can do it for them. They may not have family members. Or they may have family members like me who have no skills whatsoever in how to do repairs. They may have serious medical conditions which leaves them open to these quack industries. I'm sure everyone remembers Andy Kaufman, the comedian from Taxi, when his last stages of his life he was dying of cancer, and he was traveling over to the Philippines and paying all this money to these quack doctors trying to save his life. It is a $12 to $18 billion a year industry in this nation, the quack medical industry. And when you're desperate, if you're at the end of your life and you're trying to do anything, it leaves you very vulnerable. What are some types of theft and fraud schemes that they use out here? We all know that basically you can get on the internet and learn how to do any kind of fraud. You just Google it, go to YouTube, and it'll tell you how to do it. Does anyone think that that picture on the top left was exploitation? Maybe not to the criminal level, but she was obviously exploiting him. Home repair schemes. The Irish travelers, the gypsies, the ones that come out of Murphy Village in South Carolina. I'm sure for the DeKalb County officers that are here, you're very familiar with these individuals. For years, we would have just major problems with them. They would come in, usually it's during the springtime, they'll come in their fancy pickup trucks, and they target the elderly. That's the main clients that they go after. They may come in, you know, the driveway repair, the asphalt drive has some leftover asphalt, or they may get out and just spray paint it. Hey, I'm going to seal your driveway for you, and they may quote them $600, and then at the end of it, they'll come back and say, you owe me $6,000, or you owe me $10,000. And what is that elderly person supposed to do? They're going to pay them, because these individuals will use intimidation. And a lot of times, if you're investigating these cases, you'll have a bank photo that you can get, because they'll go with that victim to the bank to make sure they get paid.
Cops came by and they got me out from underneath the car, asking questions.
But Elwood says he had no idea what had happened just a few doors down.
Alarming? Yeah, I guess it's alarming out here.
No one was more alarmed than the woman who lives here. She says 3 men came to her door, asked to come inside. They told her they were selling carpet. She sent them away. It's a good thing she called police, because the suspects had made their way to Roberts Drive. That's where police tracked them down.
They're in shock, basically. They're scared that someone's coming back, and just them actually being in their house, they feel so violated.
Fort Oglethorpe detective Johnny Lanham says the couple who lives here was targeted because they're elderly. He says the trio made off with $500 in cash and a couple of gold rings. He says when their carpet sales pitch line didn't work, one of them asked for a drink of water.
Gypsies, or travelers, as you like to call them, which are just well-organized con artists and scam artists that make a living out of doing that.
But these so-called con artists didn't get to cash their last paycheck. Detectives recovered the money and the rings and found this in the suspect's car: a scanner to monitor police, handheld radios, even card magnets to suggest they're utility workers.
They knew what they were doing when they got here. They were well prepared. I just don't think they were prepared for us.
Folks in the
What great evidence. Fake contractor stickers, magnetic, that you can put on your car. If you're an officer responding, all that can be used against them in court later on. The sweetheart scam. These are probably some of the most heartbreaking of the scams, because it used to be in the old days, the fraudsters would use the personal want ads to meet a partner. Well, now most seniors, most elderly folks are on the internet. They're computer literate. That opens up a whole new avenue to reach the victims by the bad guys. And they'll send them money, they'll wire it overseas. One of the type of cases that adult protective services work are these cases involving it, where the family members are calling up and saying, hey, my father, my mother, they're sending money overseas, what can I do to stop it? And they're making bad decisions on it. And again, that might be a situation, we look at it, adult protective services may be able to help them maybe put a conservatorship in place to protect them, stop them from losing their money. Pigeon drop. That's one where you're approached in the parking lot and they'll say, hey, I found this package of money. What should I do with it? And there's usually 3 people involved in a pigeon drop. Another person will walk up like they're not connected with it, and they'll help bolster the con so that it's more believable. And then the main person who's found this money will get on the phone and they'll talk to their attorney. There'll be a third person. They'll put that attorney to the victim and say, yes, it's okay. You can share this money. But at the end of it, the victim's left holding usually a paper bag or a roll of shredded paper, and the con artist gets it. And that con has been around since the early 1900s. And why do you think it's still out there? Because it works. People fall for it. They fall for it every day. It's always on the news. Every time you turn the news on, you'll see something about the pigeon drop. Ponzi investment fraud schemes. I've worked a lot of these over the years. Again, there's no problem with wanting to do an investment and make money. We all want to make money on our profit on our investments. But a lot of times you think that you're making double your money, triple your money, and it doesn't work. And the thing is, with investment fraud, you have to do your due diligence if you're an investor. Is this person licensed to sell a security? Is it a legitimate investment? And most of the fraudsters, when they do these cases, they always pose it like, well, you know, it's real secretive. I'm letting you in the back door. We're only the other corporations, the high-level rich people. They're the only ones allowed to invest in this. So, but I have a way to get you in the back door, and you'll make this money. So I can't really give you specifics about it. But trust me, you're going to make all this money. And I see it all the time. And they invest. And they'll continue to send money. And what will happen a lot of times, they'll get some money back, which is the alleged interest payments. And really what that money is from other victims investing, and they'll send a little bit back to the person to make it look like they're making interest on the investment, and they're really not. And then at some point, it all falls apart. And usually on Ponzi or investment fraud schemes, the only people who make money are the people who initially invest in it, because they're the seed people. They're the people that the con artist wants to go out and get his friends and his family members involved. They do make money, the first ones, the initial ones. Internet schemes. Wow. Has anyone not received an email from Nigeria for money? And this is not in any way to be disparaging of Nigeria or Nigerian businesses, but the reality is there's a lot of fraud that comes out of Nigeria. And why do they send all these emails out? These spoofed, these emails? Because it works. It doesn't cost the suspects anything to do the crime, to send out these email blasts, and all it takes is one person to bite, and they've accomplished what they were seeking to do. And it works. This is one actually my wife almost clicked on, and it didn't say phishing on it though. If you look close at it, and I don't know if you can see it, if you look at the address on it, it's http://www9.bankofamerica. So if you looked at it quick, you would think that's a real Bank of America address. What happens if you enter your credit card information and your PIN, and you click on it? Your money will immediately start being withdrawn by the suspects. And normally these suspects are operating out of West Africa, the former Soviet bloc countries over in Eastern Europe, and the odds of getting your money back are slim to none. But it's a very realistic looking email. Telemarketing. Telemarketers are probably some of the most difficult cases to work. Again, because usually the suspects are from either out of the country, which makes it very difficult, especially for local law enforcement officers to investigate these cases. Because you have to put it, who's on the other end of that phone? Who's the suspect? We have to identify that person, right, to make a case. But they're very difficult cases to investigate for officers to actually make an arrest. And you add into that mix if you have an elderly person, and they're lonely, and they're getting that phone call, and they're happy. They actually like talking to the telemarketers because they're friendly to them, right? Very few bad guys are going to be rude or obnoxious. Now, they will it later on in the stage. Once that person starts sending them money, and if they try to stop, then the suspects on the other end will escalate. They'll become aggressive with them and threatening with them. But usually at the initial contact, they're going to be nice. And that person is going to look forward to that phone call. And then they'll start sending them money. What happens if you start sending money to suspects, to bad guys, to con artists? They put you on a sucker list. Just like a legitimate marketing company sells their list. If an insurance company sells insurance to someone, they may sell your name to another kind of insurance company because you're a hot lead. You actually bought insurance. That's a legitimate marketing tool. Well, suspects do the same thing. They market just like anyone else. And they'll sell that person's name to a sucker list. And it never ends after that. Once their name gets out there and they've actually invested and sent money, it never ends. They have to end up changing their phone numbers. And that can be difficult because a lot of times elderly folks do not want to change their phone numbers. It's the same number that they've had for their entire life. That's all their family members, their friends, their grandchildren's. And so they don't want to change it normally. So that makes it really difficult to try to put protective measures in place to stop them from losing their money. Two of the most common ones we are encountering is Jamaican telemarketers and Canadian telemarketers. We have had some luck with Canada, working with them They're our neighbor to the north, to actually get folks in custody, working with the mounted police up there. But Jamaica, very limited success in really doing these cases down there.
Donna Parker can't help but feel guilty.
I felt stupid. I mean, it's like, I should have known. I should have looked. I should have paid attention. But I didn't.
By the time she figured out what was happening, her elderly parents were hundreds of thousands in debt.
And I just spent all this time going, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
By phone and mail, a ring of Canadian sweepstakes scammers had tricked Charles and Miriam Parker into giving away their life savings. And before it was over, the highly educated couple had become unwitting accomplices in what officials say is a $3 billion a year racket.
I've been on house calls with older adults where there have been concerns about abuse or neglect, and literally not 60 seconds would go by that their phone wasn't ringing. And I would pick up the phone and say hello, and it was, you know, a Nigerian princess or somebody in the Canadian lottery.
FBI agent Joan Fleming handled the Parker case and says the problem is getting worse every year.
I'm seeing larger amounts of money from single victims reported. You know, 6 figures is not unusual.
But what makes the Parker case unusual is that after they'd been cleaned out, the couple became what authorities call money mules. The scammers would have other elderly victims send cash to the Parkers, hidden in old magazines. Mrs. Parker would then repackage it and forward it to Montreal.
Having the money hopscotch from one victim to another makes it much more complicated.
The Parkers' troubles began sometime in late 2004.
I knew my dad had a good retirement. I knew for years they'd been able, after he retired, been able to live within their means. Then all of a sudden, they couldn't.
Like many victims, her parents hadn't been diagnosed with dementia or any other mental deficiency.
Even in the really early stages before you have Alzheimer's, like mild cognitive impairment, you become more vulnerable to getting scammed.
Everybody said to me, it's their money. It's their money.
After nearly 4 years of struggle, the Parker children sued to have their parents declared financially incompetent.
You know how hard that is to take your parents to court? The one thing my dad kept saying was, I am not mentally incompetent. I am not mentally incompetent.
The man the Parkers knew over the phone as Howard Clark was really Clayton Atkinson, a Canadian with a lengthy criminal record. He pleaded guilty in March and is serving 12 and a half years in a federal prison. The couple lost more than $200,000 to this and other scams.
I think they are the lowest of the low. To this day, I don't understand why 2 perfectly intelligent people just didn't finally say, forget it. Nothing's ever coming through, forget it. And they never did. Never did.
Charles Parker died in February. His 87-year-old widow now has a 30-year mortgage and gets a monthly stipend from her daughter. Alan Breed, Associated Press, Cary, North Carolina.
I love that example because all the issues that come up in these cases, they talked about. How hard is it to approach your parents and say what you're doing is wrong, and you need to take that action. You need to take that step to go ahead and seek a conservatorship or guardianship or put protective measures in place, and that is difficult. That is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to family members. But is it needed? Yeah, well, you have to make those tough decisions sometimes with our elderly. The good thing is most folks are going to live happy, healthy lives and not really probably have problems. But when we do have those issues come up, that's hard decisions that family members have to make sometimes. And what she said, it's their money. They can do what they want with it. And that's a big balance we have in life, right? I love the scales of justice as a symbol because everything we do is a balance of allowing someone to live how they want to live their life, to have autonomy and self-determination, against our mission, our role, to protect them, to stop them. And we as a society, if we have someone who's being taken advantage of, if they have cognitive impairment, and they are being preyed upon, are we not obligated as a society to protect them, just like we protect children? And I can tell you, from when I started policing 30 years ago, the way we handled child abuse cases and the way we handled domestic violence cases was completely different than the way we handle them now. And we know through learning and education and dealing with these cases, we have a child protective model in place how we handle these cases, and it works. Well, we're kind of at that stage now with the elderly in putting these kind of measures in place, because we have to look at these cases differently than we look at a traditional case, traditional theft case, and look at all these other factors. And to a certain extent, take on some of the things that worked for the child protective services. eBay, I think there's probably very few companies that have not been spoofed. Careful what you click on in your Facebook. How many times have you had your Facebook account and you see some of your friends and they're sending you advertisements for weight loss programs or something like that, right? That they didn't send out. They got a Trojan horse. They were hacked. They clicked on something and it took over their account. So you really got to be careful. So who are the suspects in financial exploitation cases? Who are the main suspects? That's a shame. It's actually adult children of the victims are the main suspects in financial exploitation cases involving the elderly. And that adds a whole new dimension, a whole new issue for law enforcement because, you know, is it a family matter? You know, can you give your kids your money, all your money? And that's why you have to look at all the factors of the case before you make a decision on what to do. Of course, other suspects, really, most of the suspects involved in these cases are known to the victim. They're neighbors, they're family members, they're caretakers, they're guardians. And why is that? Because they have access to that person's financial information. They're in the house with the grandmother or the grandfather. They know where she keeps, or they keep the checkbooks. And how easy it is for them to get that, order up a credit card or intercept the mail, advertisement for a credit card application, change the address on it, credit card goes to them at a different address, and they start racking up charges on it. And that victim, that elderly person, may not even know that they're being exploited, that they had an identity fraud situation until several months down the road. And then when they try to contact the bank to put a stop to it, the bank's going to say, well, you didn't meet our standard of 4 weeks or whatever that bank may have to report the theft, the fraud. Well, if you don't know about it, how are you going to report it? So what are some red flags of financial exploitation? The basic ones, how's that person traditionally handle their bank account? Are they frugal? How do they manage their money? If there's sudden changes in the way that they actually manage their money, that's a red flag. You know, are they making large credit card purchases, large check withdrawals? Have they made changes in the will? Are they doing an outcry? Are they making a theft complaint? That's a big red flag. Is the activity on their accounts, their bank accounts, is it consistent with their ability? Are they bedridden and they're making a lot of withdrawals from a drive-through ATM machine? That's kind of a red flag. Are they cashing in their CDs or their savings with heavy penalties? Have there been recent changes to power of attorney? Now, I'll tell you, I had a case where this gentleman, he was from Newport News, Virginia. He was retired Navy, and he was legally blind. He wore some special glasses, and he had to use a special magnifying glass to be able to read documents. And he had a stepdaughter that he raised as if she was his own daughter here in DeKalb County. Anyway, his wife passed away, and the stepdaughter went up for the funeral, and he actually approached her after the funeral and said, hey, could you help me with my checking account and different things, because my wife, you know, she used to handle it, your mother used to handle it. And she goes, oh, no problem. So he put her as the co-signer on all these accounts. What do you think that lovely stepdaughter, what the first thing she did when she returned to DeKalb County? She went to the local bank and withdrew all his money. Cashed out his CDs. And so he called the local Newport News. Well, he started getting bounced checks back. And so, you know, he called the bank up. The bank told him, hey, your co-signer withdrew all your money. And so he tried to call her. Of course, she disconnected her phone. And then he called the local Newport News police. And of course, what do you think the Newport News police told him? The jurisdiction. The crime actually occurred in DeKalb County, not in Newport News where the victim lived. And so he called the DeKalb County Police Department, and an investigator worked the case, and he contacted the local magistrate judge and asked, gave him the circumstances and applied for, was going to apply for an arrest warrant. And that magistrate judge told him, yes, I'd issue a warrant for that. But then the officer made a mistake. He waited, and he went back the next day, And there was a different judge on duty. And what do you think this judge said? Well, that's kind of a civil matter. You know, she's on the bank accounts. It's a civil matter. And so he was kind of really dead in the water because you're not really allowed to judge shop. If you go to one judge and they tell you that you can't really get a warrant, then that's it. You're done. But ultimately, who makes a decision on felony cases? Who decides what happens to a case if you charge someone? And that's ultimately up to the district attorney's office. And they contacted me. I interviewed the suspect. And basically, he had purchased a lot of items using his money. And it felt very empowered about it. She really wasn't worried about it. Well, we ended up indicting her. And the judge was so angry that when we asked for a plea agreement, we were offering 8 years in restitution. The judge said, no, she has to serve 10 years in restitution. And we were able to order her, the court was, to sell a lot of the items she purchased, and we were able to get a good chunk of his money back, which is good because these folks need their money. It's not like a younger person that if you're defrauded out of your money, you can go back to work and save up and recover your money. If you have someone who's 85, 90, how are they going to make their money back up? They really can't. Well, that worked out really well. Now, if we looked at that case and said, well, you know what, it's a civil matter. What would happen in civil court in a case like that, right? We know that civil cases, at that dollar value, would go to Superior Court. Civil cases are low on the totem pole in the court system because criminal cases take priority. So it may be several years down the road before this case would even be heard by a judge. And say he won, that person could still appeal it, and it may be several more years before he would finally get a judgment to become whole. Well, he may not even live that long. So I think justice was much better served in this case by taking it to the criminal court. And it worked, and it really did. And it was a crime. What she did was a crime. He didn't authorize it. He put her on the account. Basically, he gave her the keys to his money, but he didn't say you could take it. We could show that all that money in that account belonged to him. She didn't put a penny in there. It was all his money. But it worked out well. Does the victim even know what's going on with their money? Do they really have a clue? Are there new people in this person's life that have taken interest? Usually a young person coming in, and next thing you know, they're engaged to be married. Happens a lot. When you start looking at these cases, is an absence of financial documents? Are there any kind of records showing what's going on? So we want these cases prosecuted, but what happens? What do you have to do before you can prosecute a case? You have to investigate the case. You have to build a case that the prosecutor and the DA's office can do something with. We have to do our part on this end. And some challenge to investigating these cases is the victim. That's probably the biggest obstacle. Shame. I'll tell you another case I had. This was a case where an elderly lady, she was fine, though. She didn't have any kind of cognitive impairment. She went to her local bank, and she was trying to withdraw $70,000. Basically, all her money in the bank account. And the teller asked her, ma'am, can I ask you why you're taking your money out? A reasonable question. And the client, the elderly lady, told her, it's none of your business. It's my money. And that's true. This is her money. She can do what she wants with it. But that's a red flag. If this person's actually closing out a bank account, normally you're not going to have any problem with asking, what are you going to do with the money? Are you buying something, you opening up, going to another bank or whatever, and you're usually not going to draw that money out in cash. Anyway, so the teller told the bank manager, who asked her the same thing, and so he called the police because he's a mandated reporter. Law enforcement officer, a police officer, patrol officer responded, and he questioned her, and she told him the same thing. It's my money, it's none of your business. And so they called the Fraud Financial Crime Unit, and 2 detectives went up there, and they talked to her, and she told them the same thing, and I was the supervisor at that time. I responded, and I talked to her, and she was telling me kind of the same thing, but I finally convinced her. I said, hey, let's take you home. She lived in a condo next to the bank, and let's talk to your son. Because obviously I knew this was fraud. I wanted to do something to stop it. And she agreed to that. So we went with her to her condo next door, and I'm sitting with her, and I'm finally, talking to her and finally get her to tell me what happened. Why are you drawing this money out? And she says, hey, I met this guy. I'm going to make $1 million with a $70,000 investment. I'm going to make $1 million. I'm like, whew, God. And then she says, true story, she goes, no, the money's here. It's under the couch that you're sitting at. And so I look under the couch, and there's a brand new Samsonite briefcase under the couch. So I go to reach for it, and she goes, no, don't move it. He goes, He told me if I tried to open it up before I gave him the money, there's a radio-controlled bomb in it, and it'll explode. And so I asked her if she had a hammer. She got me a hammer, and the two detectives that were with me said, well, we don't think there's a bomb in it, but we're going to go ahead and take her outside to play it safe. And I smashed it open, and of course, was there $1 million inside that briefcase? There was a phone directory with a towel wrapped around it to give it weight. And once the victim saw that, she started crying. Because what is she worried about? Well, she's embarrassed and she's ashamed, but she's also worried, are my children, are my family, they're going to think I'm not able to take care of myself. And they're going to want to put me in a nursing home. And no matter how nice nursing homes can be, and there's some nice nursing homes, they're not all bad, I think the average person really doesn't want to go to a nursing home. You know, they want to stay in their home, and rightly so. So anyway, she was afraid of that. And at the end of the day, we did not catch the bad guy. He got away. I had him on videotape, and we could show where he was in the bank, but as soon as the law enforcement officer responded, he took off. So the good thing is we were able to save her from losing her life savings. And at the end of the day, I felt really, really good. You know, I've done all the exciting stuff in police work, been in shootouts and high-speed chases and all that stuff, but that made me really feel good. That was more rewarding and satisfying to me than all the other things that I was able to accomplish. So, you know, sometimes you have to think outside the box. Yes, again, that's a balance, right? Does she have a right to do what she wants with her money? Absolutely, sure. Do we have an obligation as law enforcement officers in the state to protect that person? And that's a red flag. She's not willing to say what she's going to do with the money. You know, if she'd have pushed the issue, really, could we do anything? No. But can we investigate? Can we do an inquiry into what's happening? Yes, we can do that. The victim may not want the suspect to be punished. I can tell you, probably the majority of the cases that I've worked over the years, most of my victims did not want me to arrest or punish the suspects, and especially if it's a family member. There's a gentleman that's coming up right now, fraud perp. He was arrested and charged and pled guilty recently. I had arrested him many years ago for the same thing, because a lot of them are career criminals, they don't get out of it. But in that case, the victim was an elderly person, and he conned her out of her home. And to the day that she passed away, and the family member reported it, she felt that he was just this wonderful person, because he's very charismatic, you know, well-spoken, nice guy. And to the day that she passed away, even though she lost her home, she thought this guy was the greatest guy. And so they don't want you to punish them a lot of times. I had another case where a lady was a victim of mortgage fraud, a refi, and I recovered $50,000. I actually arrested the suspect and had him bring a cashier's check to the court, to the prelim, to make her whole, because again, this money is critical to these folks. And the next day she filed a complaint on me because I wouldn't drop the charge on this individual. So a lot of times you have to do things to protect folks, and they may not really want to go along with it. They may not be aware that they're being victimized. And they may be reluctant to participate, or they may be unable to participate, right? They may have, again, a cognitive impairment, disability that makes them unable to participate in these cases. Well, do we have children? Are they sometimes unable to participate? Do we do those cases? Yes. Do we have domestic violence cases where the wife denies that the abuse happened? Yeah. Do we do these cases? Every week we do these cases and win them successfully in court. And we make the case, we work around the victim. We build the case using other witnesses, other evidence. Mental capacity is very important. What was the capacity of the victim at the time of the crime? What's their capacity now? And you don't have to be incapacitated to be a victim of a crime, but it's important to know because, again, you may have to bring the doctor to court to testify. Consent. Did the victim really understand what they were consenting to? Was it an informed consent? Was it done freely and voluntarily? And when they consented, what was the mental capacity? Did they really understand the repercussions of what they were doing? Undue influence. This is probably one of the most commonly used techniques. It's almost like grooming, like in child abuse cases where the suspects groom the child to be able to molest them or take advantage of them. Suspects, in cases involving the elderly, groom them, gain their confidence. And it ends up, the ultimate decision being made is not really the victim, even though they're going along with it, agreeing to it, signing over the property, like the case we told you about with the Gypsy, willingly going along with it. He was being unduly influenced. Think about the Beltway sniper case where those two gentlemen were going around Washington, D.C., and they were sniping people. They had a special car. The tag would flop down in the back, and they were actually shooting people. And it was two gentlemen, an older ex-military and a younger gentleman, and the person pulling the trigger was the younger gentleman. He was actually the one pulling the trigger, shooting the folks, under the direction of the older gentleman. Well, when that case went to trial, the defense for the younger person was he was unduly influenced by the older one. And actually, the jury and the judge took that into consideration because ultimately, when they were found guilty, the older gentleman was put to death. He received the death penalty, and the younger one was given life. And in fact, they interviewed him recently in the paper. But he was the one actually pulling the trigger. So undue influence can be really a big factor. I'm going to show you a little clip. It's with Mickey Rooney, and I want you to listen to what he says during this clip. The loss of control, the inability to file a report, the courage to file a report, to do the outcry.
What other people see as generosity may, in reality, be the exploitation, manipulation, and sadly, emotional blackmail of elders. And people are vulnerable. I know it because I happen to be the one. My money was taken, misused, what finances I had. When I asked for information, I was told that I couldn't have any information of my own. What the hell were you talking about? I was told it was none of my business. And that it's none of my business, and when you're told that, you're left to leave powerless. You can be in control of your life 1 minute, ladies and gentlemen, and in the next minute, like that, you have absolutely, believe it or not, no control of your life. Sometimes this happens quickly, but other times it's very, very gradual. You might wonder when all this truly began. In my case, I was eventually and completely stripped of the ability to make even the most basic decisions. Where will we go? What do we do? Decisions that everyone likes to make. Over the course of time, my daily life became unbearable. Because all of this seemed to come out of nowhere. At first it was something small, and I could control it, but then it became something sinister that was completely out of my control. I felt trapped, scared, used, and frustrated. And above all, when a man feels helpless, it's terrible. And I was helpless. For years, I suffered silently. I didn't want to tell anybody. I couldn't muster the courage. And you have to have courage to, I need help. And I knew I needed it. Even when I tried to speak up, I was told to shut up and be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. It seemed that no one wanted to believe me.
How many people do you think are out here that are in a similar situation to Mickey Rooney? I mean, here's a man, appears to have all his faculties, he, really doesn't appear to have any capacity issues, and yet he was taken advantage of. And I think if you listen to everything he says, this is a little snippet of his testimony at the Senate hearing, I think it really resonates and hits home with what goes on out here every day to these folks. How important these cases are, right? Power of attorney. Power of attorney comes up a lot in these cases. And these are difficult sometimes. It's difficult sometimes for law enforcement. It's difficult sometimes for prosecutors. It's difficult sometimes for judges to really we look at it and go, oh, power of attorney, it's civil. Well, there may be a civil aspect to it. It doesn't mean automatically that it's not criminal too. You can actually have criminal and civil, right? O.J. Simpson, he was convicted in civil court and found not guilty in criminal court. So you can have both. But power of attorney, probably one of the most abused documents out here. It's really, there's not a lot of safeguards in place. It's not filed with the clerk of the court unless it's a real estate transaction. You can print it off the internet. You don't even have to use a standardized form. You can kind of, make up whatever kind of form you want. But one thing about the power of attorney that folks need to understand, you don't lose your right to handle your finances because there's a power of attorney. All you do is you're extending your ability to do your finances to someone else. Doesn't stop that person from still handling their finances. They can revoke it. They can pull it back. And it's not a license to steal. You have to act in a fiduciary responsibility for the person who you have power of attorney over. You can't act in your own best interest. I can't have power of attorney over you and take your money and put it in a bank account and benefit from it. That's not acting as a fiduciary for you. And what's the benefit? When you're looking at these, what was the capacity? Did the victim have the mental capacity to actually authorize this power of attorney at the time? They shouldn't be giving themselves loans or gifts unless it's particularly spelled out in the power of attorney. And what is the relative benefit? When you look at these, the benefit of the way the money's being handled, is it benefiting the victim or is it benefiting the suspect? It's not a license to steal. It basically gives them the keys to get in the door and access it, but it doesn't give them the right to do it. Witnesses can be a problem. Professionals, mandated reporters, folks who report these type of crimes, bankers, accountants, doctors. And why are they a problem? Well, a lot of times they don't really see the whole situation. They may see that client for only a small period of time. They may have a client that's in there that's losing weight and they're looking at it for a medical reason. The reality is, daughter or the granddaughter, someone may be exploiting that person and they can't even afford to buy food. And so they really may not understand what's going on. They may not really understand how the criminals operate. And of course, sometimes we do have those folks that simply do not want to get involved, and that's an obstacle. That's a problem sometimes. Don't have time for court. So investigative issues, venue, which is the jurisdiction where did the crime occur, that can be a problem. Most financial crimes occur where the asset or the property or the money changes hands from the victim to the suspect, unless you're using identity fraud, where it can be that, or it can also be where the victim lives. But it can get confusing, especially the age of the internet, trying to verify or establish where the venue, where the crime occurred, and who should investigate. Is it a city, is it a county, is it a state, is it a federal case? Who has the authority to investigate it? Some other issues that you have to deal with also is proving the consent. Was it a valid consent when that person agreed to it? And was undue influence a factor in your case? Because the problem sometimes with undue influence, it happens behind closed doors. So sometimes that is actually kind of hard to prove. And what was the legal authority if it was a power of attorney involved? Speed is extremely important, right? Because you have a senior citizen. Their health can decline. They may be unable to testify later on. So that's very important. We want to identify the suspects as quickly as possible. And why do we want to identify it? We want to be able to secure whatever assets are left, hopefully. We want to do search and seizure warrants, bank seizures, whatever we can to save that person's assets, because ultimately we want to protect that person. We want to protect their assets, their property, so they have a quality of life. And the third on that, we want to hold that person accountable, the suspect. And the health and physical condition. I like to call this financial violence because I'll give you an example. If an elderly person loses their home, what is the impact on that person's life? And there has been studies that actually, and we've witnessed it in our investigations, that they rapidly deteriorate. Their health deteriorates. We may want to put a special condition of the bond to stop the exploitation from continuing. If you arrest the suspect, you can take him for a judge, a magistrate's court judge, and you can ask for a special condition where that person has to stay away from them. And again, that helps protect that victim. And it's enforceable. You want to coordinate with the prosecutors to get the case hopefully indicted as quickly as possible. We want to follow the money trail, again, so we can make that victim whole. We want to be able to try to identify the assets, secure them. Other evidence we might want to do is whatever related to that financial transaction. We might want to pull the deeds, if it's a purchase of a home, a quitclaim deed, or whatever. We want to examine the doctor's notes if there's a capacity issue. We want to get statements from all the other people involved, the victims and others, the witnesses. The criminal history, a lot of times in these cases, the criminal history is not as important as in other kind of cases. Like when I used to work burglary, the criminal history of the person was important because usually a burglar, they're going to be a career burglar. Usually they do the same thing over and over again. Shoplifters, they do the same thing over and over again. A lot of times these crimes are crimes of opportunity. So a lot of times our suspects, especially with white-collar crime cases, don't have a criminal record. So it's not something that I really think is as important. The financial history of the victim. How do they manage their finances? Were they frugal? Did they gamble? I mean, that's important. Because what you want to do is show how that person handles the money. And what I like to do is go back 6 months before the crime occurred, pull that victim's bank records, examine them, look at how they managed their money, and then from the time that the suspect became exploiting them, what happened to the money then? Where did it go? And you want to use a multidisciplinary approach. We want to get adult protective services. If there's abuse and neglect and exploitation in the home, the Adult Protective Services is the agency that will investigate it. If it's in a facility, a personal care home, it's going to be the health care facility regulators. They're going to handle it. Surveyors, HFR. And then you also have the Department of Behavioral Health and Development Disabilities. They have their own investigators. But what we need to bear in mind is all these agencies, those investigations are not criminal investigations. Law enforcement, prosecutors are criminal investigations. Training, we started a training program. We're into our second year now. It's called the At-Risk Adult Crime Tactics Specialist Certification Program. We have a couple of attendees that are in the class or in the audience. And basically what it is, it's a 16-hour course that we modeled kind of after some of the other states that have these programs. And basically to get all the disciplines together, the law enforcement, the prosecutors, the judges, the healthcare facility regulators, the adult protective services case managers, all the individuals that are mandated or have some kind of do some kind of a response to cases, crimes against the elderly, and we teach them. So everyone's kind of on the same page and knows what the other person can do. And it works really, it's very effective. Great program.
The total amount of money is that was taken from you?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Can you tell us how you've been affected by what happened to you?
Well, of course, it was a terrible shock to me because I trusted her, and it was really a disaster to me because then I started worrying about how I'm going to make my living or what will happen to me. So I didn't really want to think much about it.
You want to take a break, Mr. Ospinski?
Going off the record, the time is approximately 11:20.
I'm sorry.
What is the impact of financial exploitation? And it is important. Is it important for us to protect people? Absolutely. I think of my grandfather when I look at that. That just it's just very disturbing. Work your whole life and lose everything. And what do you do? How do you exist? Very important cases. That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?